My Uncle Richard sat across a glass conference table on the 47th floor, sliding a buyout agreement toward me for $280,000. Compensation, he said with practiced sympathy, for my late father's stake in the firm they'd built together, so I could move on and heal without the burden of a business I never really understood. My name is Elena Morrison. I am 31 years old. I sat with my hands flat on the polished wood, feeling the cold surface press against my palms. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the downtown skyline. The glass walls made everything feel exposed and sterile. Richard wore monogrammed cufflinks that caught the morning light. His smile was the kind you practice in front of a mirror until it looks sympathetic without costing you anything. To his left sat David Sung, 49, wire-rimmed reading glasses perched on his nose, reviewing the transition documents with that cautious corporate neutrality he'd perfected over 2 decades as senior partner. To his right, Patricia Okonkwo, 52, in one of her tailored navy suits, nodded along with the kind of sympathetic, professional distance that said she genuinely felt bad for me, but had already decided this was the cleanest outcome for
everyone involved.
A junior associate whose name I didn't catch sat at the end of the table, taking notes on a laptop. Richard leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping into that register people use when they're delivering bad news. They've already decided is good for you. Elena, your father and I built Morrison Chen Architecture from nothing. We spent 28 years turning this into one of the most respected institutional design firms in the region. Marcus would want you to have security, not the stress of trying to navigate a world you were never trained for. The folder sat between us. Clean exit, fair price. Honoring Marcus Morrison's memory by protecting his daughter from her own inexperience. I did not interrupt. I did not raise my voice. I let him finish his entire pitch. David cleared his throat softly. It's a generous offer, Elena. More than market rate for a junior stake with no operational history. You could take time to figure out what you want to do next without financial pressure. Patricia added her own careful encouragement. Your father spoke so highly of your architecture degree. Maybe this gives you the freedom to explore your own path instead of feeling obligated to fill shoes that, and I mean this with respect, were custom-made for someone else. Richard's hands were steady as he turned the folder toward me, opening to the signature page. It was already marked with post-it flags where I was supposed to sign. He had brought his favorite pen, the heavy silver Mont Blanc he used for closing deals with institutional clients. Everything about this moment had been choreographed. I looked at the number again, 280,000. For a 50% stake in a firm that managed 14 major institutional clients with $4.7 million in annual billings. The math was so insultingly simple that I almost admired the audacity. I asked one question. Richard, who signed the Mansfield Tower contract renewal 14 months ago? His confident smile did not waver. He reached into his briefcase without hesitation, pulling out a document I had not asked to see but that he was clearly eager to present as evidence of seamless continuity. He slid it across the table. The signature was in blue ink, clean, confident. The loops and pressure exactly matching the hand that had signed 40 years of architectural contracts. Richard's pause lasted 3 seconds. I watched his eyes track across the page, then back to the signature line. Then to me. It was not Marcus Morrison's handwriting. My father's Parkinson's had made his signature a shaking scrawl by the time he died. And it was not Richard's own careful cursive. The silence in the conference room changed texture. David's pen stopped moving. Patricia's gaze shifted from the document to Richard's face. Richard recovered quickly, his voice still smooth. Marcus and I had signing authority across all major contracts. Standard partnership protocol. I nodded slowly. Of course, but I am asking specifically about Mansfield Tower, James Whitmore's institutional contract. The one that came up for renewal in late 2022, about 6 weeks after my father's death. Richard's jaw tightened just slightly. He pulled the document back toward himself, studying it with the focused intensity of someone who had not looked at it this closely before. His fingers traced the date stamp. October 14th, 2022. I let the silence hold. Before I show you the 11 client contracts you think you are inheriting, I said quietly, let me take you back 6 years. If you are watching this, I want you to know something. This is not a confession. This is testimony. I am speaking to you as someone who has lived inside a system designed to erase you while pretending to honor you. If you have ever been the family member everyone assumes will fade quietly into the background. If you have ever been offered money to disappear from a legacy you helped build, I need you to stay with me for what comes next. Please like and subscribe to The Great Revenge. Leave a comment. Tell me your age. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what time it is there. I love connecting with all of you. Now let me take you back to 2019, to a Saturday afternoon in my father's home office. To the day Marcus Morrison taught me the architecture of power. My father's office was nothing like the conference room where I now sat. It was cluttered warmth. Drafting tables piled with blueprints and client portfolios. The walls covered in framed renderings of the buildings he had designed over 4 decades. Mansfield Tower, the Keller Science Center, the Riverside Museum expansion that had won 3 national awards. He was 64 years old. The tremor in his right hand had become impossible to hide. He could still draft by hand if he worked slowly, anchoring his wrist against the table edge, but his signature had deteriorated into something that looked like a child's attempt at cursive. I was 25. I had graduated with my architecture degree and immediately taken a project coordinator position at Morrison Chen. Not because my father had pulled strings, but because Richard had calculated that having Marcus's daughter on staff was good optics with institutional clients who valued legacy and continuity. I was useful as long as I stayed small. My father called me into his office on a Saturday when the rest of the firm was closed. He had papers spread across his desk, legal documents I did not recognize. "Elena," he said, his voice still carrying that teaching precision he had never lost. "I need you to understand something about how power works in a partnership." He explained that Morrison Chen Architecture was a 50-50 partnership on paper, but Richard controlled client relationships. Richard attended the galas and the fundraisers. Richard played golf with the institutional board members who approved 7-figure design contracts. My father had always been the creative engine, the one who actually designed the buildings, but Richard had spent 28 years positioning himself as the firm's public face. "When I am gone," my father said, "Richard will try to take full control. He will tell the clients that he is providing continuity. That Marcus Morrison's designs are lovely, but Marcus Morrison is no longer here to execute them. He will offer to buy out my stake from you at a fraction of its worth, framing it as a kindness." I remember the weight of the drafting compass necklace he had given me on my 18th birthday. Sterling silver. The same compass he had used to draft the Mansfield Tower plans in 1987. I was wearing it that Saturday afternoon. I have worn it every day since. My father slid a document across the desk. Durable power of attorney. He had already signed it. His signature was shaky but legally witnessed. "This gives you signing authority on every contract, every client agreement, every financial document tied to my half of the firm," he said. "Effective immediately, it does not expire when I die. It transfers with my estate." I read the document 3 times. The language was precise, irrevocable, binding. "Why are you giving this to me now?" I asked. "Because Richard does not see you," my father said. "He sees a 25-year-old project coordinator who will be easy to erase. He does not know you have been reviewing every major contract that crosses this desk since you were 19. He does not know you understand fiduciary duty and institutional procurement law better than half the senior partners." My father leaned back in his chair. The tremor in his hand was visible even when he rested it on the armrest. "You are going to let him think he has won," he said. "You are going to be quiet and cooperative and grieving when the time comes. And then you are going to show him the foundation he has been standing on." I became a backup signatory on every major institutional contract Morrison Chen Architecture held. My father coached me through the mechanics, how to draft addendums, how to liaise with clients, how to position myself as a continuity bridge without ever claiming authority that would provoke Richard's suspicion. For 3 years, I signed documents, renewals, amendments, procurement extensions. My name appeared in the signature blocks of contracts worth millions of dollars in billings. Richard never asked. He never checked. He assumed my father was still signing everything that mattered, and when the tremor made that impossible, he assumed the clients were simply being patient with an aging architect's declining motor control. In late 2022, James Whitmore's office reached out to renew the Mansfield Tower maintenance contract. My father had been dead for 6 weeks. The email came directly to me because I had been the point of contact on the prior renewal. I signed it, October 14th, 2022. My signature in blue ink, clear and legally binding. 14 months before this Thursday morning conference room meeting. Richard had no idea. He was busy making the rounds to clients, explaining that Marcus Morrison's tragic passing would not interrupt service, that Morrison Chen Architecture's institutional expertise would continue seamlessly under his leadership. Now, sitting across from him in the glass-walled conference room with the $280,000 buyout folder open in front of me, I watched him process the signature he did not recognize. David Sung adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. Is there a problem with the Mansfield documentation? Richard's voice stayed smooth, but I could hear the calculation underneath. No problem. Just confirming timeline details. I folded my hands on the table. The silver compass necklace rested against my collarbone. My father had taught me that power is not volume. Power is knowing exactly where the load-bearing walls are located. I did not tell Richard what I knew, not yet. I did not explain the 47 pages of contract evidence I had compiled over 6 months. I did not reveal the 11 client agreements that carried my signature, not his, binding $4.7 million in annual billings to legal authority he had never possessed. I simply looked at the buyout offer and said, I will need to review this with my attorney. Richard's smile returned, confident again. Of course. Take your time. We want you to feel comfortable with the transition. Patricia Okonkwo closed her leather portfolio. We all want what's best for you, Elena. I stood, thanked them for their time. Walked out of the conference room with the folder under my arm, leaving them to their assumptions about the grieving daughter who would sign away her father's legacy for a check that would not even cover a year's rent in this city. The elevator descended 47 floors. I watched the numbers drop. My reflection in the polished steel doors showed a woman in a gray wool suit, holding a buyout agreement she would never sign, wearing a compass necklace that pointed true north. Richard thought he was buying me out. He thought he was erasing me. What he did not know was that I had been the firm's actual signatory authority since 2019, and the architecture of his theft was about to collapse under its own weight. I graduated with honors from the Yale School of Architecture in May 2019. The diploma came with $87,000 in student debt and exactly one job offer: Morrison Chen Architecture. Boutique practice, 12 people, 14 major institutional clients. My father's firm. The family assumed nepotism. I assumed apprenticeship. I did not understand yet that Marcus Morrison was teaching me a different kind of architecture entirely. The office occupied the entire 47th floor of a glass tower downtown. Open-plan studio. Exposed HVAC ducts painted matte black. Blueprint tables arranged in careful symmetry. The kind of workspace that appears in architectural magazines under headings like Workspace as Philosophy. I started as project coordinator. The title meant I managed client meetings, updated rendering software, coordinated material samples, kept project timelines from collapsing. Junior work, invisible labor that kept the visible work possible. My father and Richard Chen had founded the practice 18 years earlier. Equal partners. Complementary skills, everyone said. Marcus handled design and client relationships. Richard managed operations and business development. The division looked clean on paper. In practice, I learned quickly, Richard's business development meant taking credit for Marcus's designs in rooms where Marcus was not present. I watched it happen at the firm's holiday party that December. Richard stood near the bar in a tailored charcoal suit, monogrammed cufflinks catching the pendant lights, describing the waterfront library project to the CEO of Pembroke Development. He used phrases like my vision for adaptive reuse and contextual modernism I pioneered. The library was Marcus's design. Marcus was across the room speaking quietly with the structural engineer about load-bearing wall placement. Richard never mentioned his name once. I did not say anything. I was 25 years old, 6 months into my first professional position. I understood the hierarchy. Junior coordinators did not correct senior partners at holiday parties. But I started paying attention differently after that. Marcus taught me by showing, not telling. He would call me into his office late afternoons when client meetings ended and the studio went quiet. His office was smaller than Richard's, no views. Just north-facing windows, a drafting table, and walls covered in pinned sketches. He kept a leather portfolio case on the credenza. Burgundy leather, brass corners, the kind of object that accumulates meaning through decades of use. Inside were contracts, not architectural drawings, legal agreements, retainer letters, force majeure clauses, signature authority documentation. The first lesson came on a Tuesday in July. I had been at the firm 2 months. Marcus spread a 40-page contract across his drafting table, the Hartwell Museum renovation, $2.3 million project. He pointed to page 17, section 8.4. Force majeure, he said. Read it aloud. I read, in the event of acts of God, war, labor disputes, or other events beyond the reasonable control of either party, performance under this agreement may be suspended without penalty. Standard boilerplate language, I said. Marcus tapped the page with his finger. The tremor was barely visible then, just a slight irregularity in the movement. He said, what is reasonable control? Who decides what qualifies as beyond it? If I tell the client we cannot meet deadline because our steel supplier went bankrupt, does that suspend the penalty? Clause or trigger breach of contract litigation? I did not know. He said the person who controls the interpretation controls the outcome. Legal language is not decoration. It is load-bearing structure. You can design the most beautiful building in the world, but if the contract language collapses under pressure, the project dies. He looked at me directly. You went to architecture school to learn how to design buildings. I am teaching you how to design power. The second lesson came 3 weeks later. Marcus had been diagnosed with Parkinson's in April. He had not told the firm yet, just me. The tremor in his right hand was worsening. He could still draft by hand, but the line quality was deteriorating, smooth curves becoming jagged approximations. I found him one evening at his drafting table, 7 p.m., everybody else gone. He was sketching the massing study for a residential tower in Charlotte. The pencil shook in his hand. The lines were rough. He set the pencil down, sat back, said, "You see the columns?" I looked at the sketch. 4 structural columns arranged in a grid, standard bearing system. He said, "I see the load paths, where the weight travels, how forces distribute through the frame. What happens when one element fails? Architecture is not what you draw. It is what you understand about what holds the drawing up." He opened a drawer, pulled out a small object wrapped in tissue paper, unwound the paper. Inside was a silver drafting compass, antique, the kind architects used before CAD software, solid weight in the hand, brass hinges worn smooth. He handed it to me. My father gave this to me when I graduated. He said it would teach me to draw perfect circles. It did not, but it taught me that precision is a practice, not a gift. I wore it on a chain after that, every day. It sits against my sternum now while I am telling you this. The Parkinson's diagnosis became firm knowledge in September. Marcus gathered everyone in the main studio on a Friday afternoon. He explained the condition. Progressive. Manageable with medication. No immediate impact on his work. Richard put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Told the staff that Morrison Chen Architecture was a partnership built on resilience and continuity. That Marcus's legacy was secure. That the firm would adapt and thrive. He used the word "we" 11 times in 4 minutes. I counted. I watched the staff's faces. They believed him. They saw Richard as the operational backbone, the man who would carry the practice forward if Marcus's hands failed. I saw something different. I saw a man already performing the eulogy while my father was still alive. The third lesson came on a Saturday afternoon in October. My father called me to his house, not the office, his home in the suburbs. 2-story colonial, quiet street. The home office was on the 2nd floor, cluttered warmth. Drafting table by the window, bookshelves floor to ceiling, stacks of client files on every surface. The leather portfolio case sat on his desk. He did not ease into the conversation. He said, "If something happens to me, Richard will try to take this." I said, "Take what?" He said, "The practice, the clients, the control." He will position himself as continuity leadership. He will tell the clients that I am incapacitated or retired. He will take credit for my work and marginalize you until you leave or accept a buyout that erases you. He will do this systematically, and he will make it look like kindness. I said, "You are his partner. You founded the firm together. Marcus said, "Partnership is a legal structure. It is not loyalty. I have watched Richard operate for 18 years. I know exactly what he will do." He opened the portfolio case. Inside were papers. He slid them across the desk. Durable power of attorney. Effective immediately. Transferable with estate. Co-trustee designation on the firm's operational LLC. Backup signatory authority on all major client contracts. I said, "I am 25 years old. I coordinate project schedules." He said, "You are my daughter. You have a degree from Yale. You understand contracts and you understand power. If I become incapacitated or die, you will hold legal authority over the client relationships that generate $4.7 million in annual billings." Richard will not know this. He will assume the authority defaults to him as surviving senior partner. It will not. It will default to you. He tapped the power of attorney document. "Sign this. I will file the originals with the estate attorney. Nobody else will know." I read the documents. The language was clear. Durable power of attorney granted me authority to act on Marcus's behalf in all business and financial matters. The backup signatory designation added my name to every major client contract as authorized representative in the event of Marcus's incapacity or death. The co-trustee status gave me equal control over the LLC that held the firm's operating capital. I said, "Why are you doing this now?" He said, "Because I can still sign my name. In 6 months, I may not be able to." He picked up a pen, set it down, picked it up again. The tremor made the barrel shake. He said, "Parkinson's takes your fine motor control, then your balance, then your voice. I do not know how long I have before I cannot execute legal documents. I am doing this while I still can." I signed. Marcus signed as witness. He placed the documents back in the portfolio case. Said he would deliver them to the estate attorney Monday morning. Nobody at the firm would be told. Not Richard? Not David Sung, not Patricia Okonkwo, not the associates or staff. This was invisible architecture. Load-bearing structure nobody could see. I said, "What happens if you tell Richard?" Marcus said. "Then he prepares. He restructures the client agreements. He moves assets. He builds a legal position that makes you irrelevant. The only advantage you will have is that he does not know you hold the authority. Do not give that away." I went back to the office Monday morning. Richard was in the conference room with a potential client, Grayson Properties, mixed-use development in Durham. I could see them through the glass walls. Richard leaning forward, hands open, performing the kind of warm, confident authority that makes people sign contracts. The client was nodding, smiling. Richard glanced at me through the glass, smiled briefly, turned back to the client. I stood in the main studio holding my coffee. The silver compass rested against my sternum under my shirt. In my bag was a copy of the power of attorney Marcus had given me. I understood suddenly that I was standing in a room where I held more legal power than anyone realized. Richard controlled the performance. I controlled the paperwork. I did not tell anyone. I went back to coordinating project schedules, updating rendering software, managing material samples, invisible labor. I watched Richard take credit for Marcus's designs in client meetings. I watched him position himself as continuity leadership. I watched him build the narrative that would erase me. I watched and I documented, because Marcus had taught me that architecture is not what you draw. It is what you understand about what holds the drawing up. The power was there, hidden in the structure, waiting for the moment Richard would try to take what he thought was his. That moment would come. I knew it would come. I did not know it would take 3 years. I did not know Marcus would die before Richard made his move. I did not know Richard would be stupid enough to forge signatures on client contracts while I held backup signatory. Authority he never checked. But I knew the lesson Marcus taught me that Saturday afternoon in his home office. If someone tries to take what is yours, make sure you control the load paths. Make sure you know exactly where the structure will fail when you remove the support. I wore the compass every day after that. I filed the power of attorney in a fireproof safe at home. I went to work. I smiled at Richard in the hallways. I coordinated the projects. I waited. The load-bearing walls were in place. Richard just did not know he was standing underneath them. I started building the forensic evidence file on October 23, 2020, the day after Marcus signed the Mansfield Tower. Renewal with a hand that shook so badly he couldn't hold the pen. I was 27 years old. Marcus was 66. We sat in his home office on a Tuesday morning. The two-story colonial in the suburbs had become a workspace defined by his illness. Drafting tables cluttered with client portfolios, blueprint tubes leaning against the wall like witnesses. The window overlooked maple trees turning copper in the October light. Marcus sat at his desk with the Mansfield contract spread open. James Whitmore's institutional letterhead ran across the top. 3-year renewal with annual billing escalators. $427,000 per year indexed to inflation. The signature line waited at the bottom of page 7. Marcus tried to pick up the pen twice. His right hand tremored the moment his fingers closed around the barrel. The Parkinsons had progressed faster than either of us expected. In April 2019, it had been a diagnostic curiosity. By October 2020, it had become architectural fact, something that changed how the structure bore weight. I placed my hand over his. I said, "I can sign this." He looked at me with that teaching precision he'd used when I was 25 and first learning how power worked. "The power of attorney is valid," he said. "You are attorney in fact. Your signature binds the firm legally." I pulled the document toward me. I uncapped my father's fountain pen, the one he could no longer control, and signed on the line that read, "Principal, Architect," I wrote. "Elena Morrison, attorney in fact for Marcus Morrison, per durable power of attorney dated October 12, 2019. The signature took 4 seconds. It was precise. It was legally binding. It transferred $427,000 in annual institutional billing to my authority, while Richard sat in the 47th floor office, telling a Grayson Properties client that he provided continuity leadership. Marcus watched me sign. He said, "Make a copy before you file it." I made 3 copies. One went into the fireproof safe at my apartment. One went into Marcus's estate attorney's filing cabinet. One went into a manila folder labeled Backup Signatory Authority, Active Contracts 2020 that I kept in the locked bottom drawer of my desk at Morrison Chen Architecture. I filed the original with James Whitmore's office on October 26, 2020. His assistant confirmed receipt by email. The contract was legally executed. My signature was on file. Richard never checked the signature block. He never asked who had signed it. He assumed Marcus was still handling the operational work or that signatures were administrative formality. Paperwork that lived in filing cabinets while real architects designed buildings. That was the first document in what would become a 47-page forensic binder. I did not tell Richard I had signed the Mansfield contract. I did not announce my authority in team meetings. I simply continued working as project coordinator while holding legal control over one of the firm's largest institutional clients. The only advantage I had was that Richard did not know the advantage existed. The second signature came 6 weeks later, December 2020. Harbor Development Corporation issued an RFP for a mixed-use waterfront complex, $2.8 million design fee, 14-month timeline, the kind of institutional work that defined a practice's reputation. Marcus and I prepared the proposal over 8 days. We worked in his home office because his tremor made studio collaboration impossible. He dictated design philosophy while I drafted technical specifications. He reviewed elevations while I formatted the submission package. By December 18th, he could no longer hold a pencil steady enough to sketch. His hands betrayed him every time he tried. The cover sheet required the principal architect's signature. Marcus said, "You sign it. I will review every page, but you execute the document." I signed, Elena Morrison, attorney in fact for Marcus Morrison, Morrison Chen Architecture. I submitted the proposal electronically on December 21, 2020. The file upload timestamp was 4:47 p.m. My signature appeared on page 1 as the binding legal authority. Richard was at the firm holiday party that afternoon, toasting the team's successful year, taking credit for projects Marcus had designed while Marcus sat at home too ill to attend. Harbor Development awarded us the contract on January 12, 2021. The congratulatory call came to the main office line. Richard answered. He told the client he was thrilled, that the project aligned perfectly with the firm's vision, that he personally looked forward to collaborating with their team. He did not know I had signed the proposal. He did not know my signature held the contract authority. He assumed Marcus had somehow managed to execute the paperwork before his condition deteriorated further. I kept a copy of the signed cover sheet in my locked desk drawer. I did not correct Richard's assumption. I let him believe he controlled the relationship while I held the legal instrument that bound Morrison Chen Architecture to the client. That was the second document. The third signature happened during Marcus's hospitalization. March 2021, University Library Edition. Change order for structural revisions. $140,000 budget increase requiring principal architect approval. The request came through on a Wednesday morning. Marcus was at Presbyterian Hospital undergoing tests for medication adjustment. His tremor had worsened to the point where he could not dress himself without assistance. The change order required signature within 48 hours to avoid delaying the construction timeline. I drove to the hospital Wednesday evening. Marcus was in a pale green room on the 7th floor. IV stand beside the bed. The window overlooked the parking structure. His hands rested on the blanket, fingers curling involuntarily. I showed him the change order paperwork. I walked him through the structural revisions line by line. He reviewed the engineering calculations with the same precision he'd used when I was 25 and learning contract law. His mind was still the sharpest instrument in any room. His hands simply would not obey. He said, "Sign it. You have authority. The power of attorney covers operational decisions." I signed the change order in the hospital room at 7:23 p.m. on March 17, 2021. I used the hospital bedside table as a desk. Marcus watched me write my name in the space marked authorized signature. I scanned the document using the hospital's business center and emailed it to the university's project manager before 8 p.m. The change order was approved. Construction continued without delay. The university sent a thank you email to Morrison Chen Architecture praising our responsiveness. Richard never knew I had signed it. He was at a March industry conference in Boston, presenting on adaptive reuse strategies, listing projects as his portfolio work while Marcus lay in a hospital bed unable to hold a pen. I filed the signed change order in my locked drawer. That was the third document. Between October 2020 and Marcus's death in August 2022, I signed as attorney-in-fact on 11 of the firm's 14 major institutional contracts. I signed renewals. I signed change orders. I signed budget amendments. I signed scope expansions. Every signature included the language, attorney-in-fact for Marcus Morrison per durable power of attorney dated October 12, 2019. Every signature was legally valid. Every signature was filed with the client's institutional records. Richard never checked the signature blocks. He never reviewed the filed contracts. He attended client meetings and performed the role of senior partner while I executed the operational authority that bound those clients to Morrison Chen Architecture. Marcus died on August 14, 2022. The funeral was on August 18, Presbyterian Church downtown. 140 people in attendance. Richard wore a charcoal suit and Italian shoes. He stood at the front during the reception portion, accepting condolences, his hand resting on my shoulder whenever someone approached to express sympathy. He told story after story about Marcus's vision, Marcus's brilliance, Marcus's irreplaceable talent. He used the word legacy 11 times in 20 minutes. He promised me in front of David Sung and Patricia Okonkwo that he would honor everything Marcus had built, that the firm would carry forward the standards Marcus had established, that no one would ever forget what Morrison Chen Architecture stood for. His hand felt heavy on my shoulder. His voice carried that practiced grief, the kind that sounds authentic because you have rehearsed it in front of a mirror, until the cadence flows like water. I did not cry during the funeral. I stood beside the casket in a black dress and the silver compass necklace and listened to Richard perform sorrow while mentally cataloging every contract I had signed in the previous 22 months. I had legal authority over $4.7 million in annual institutional billings. Richard believed he had inherited those relationships. He did not know the contracts were bound to signatures he had never examined. The systematic erasure began 2 weeks after the funeral. September 1st, 2022, office meeting. Richard called the full team into the 47th floor conference room. All 12 employees, David Sung and Patricia Okonkwo, sat in their usual positions. I sat near the window. Richard stood at the head of the table. He said the firm needed to streamline operations during this transition period. He said clients needed to see stable leadership and continuity of vision. He said Marcus would have wanted the practice to move forward without disruption. Then he announced the restructuring. My title changed from senior project coordinator to consultant. My office moved from the windowed space near Marcus's old office to a smaller interior room with no natural light. My name was removed from client meeting invitations. My email signature was updated to reflect consulting status rather than core team membership. Richard's language was careful. He said it was temporary. He said I needed time to grieve. He said the firm wanted to protect me from the operational pressures that came with major institutional clients during such a difficult personal period. Patricia nodded sympathetically. David adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and made notes. No one objected. I said, I understand. I moved my belongings to the interior office on September 6th. I reduced my office presence to 3 days per week. I stopped attending client meetings. I let Richard route Marcus's former clients to his extension. I performed the role of grieving daughter being gently transitioned out of her late father's practice. What I was actually doing was building a forensic case. I started the audit on September 10th, 2022. Late nights. The office emptied by 6:30 p.m. most evenings. I stayed until 10 or 11. I used my consultant keycard access to enter the file room after hours. I photographed every contract Richard had touched since Marcus's death. I found the continuity of service agreements on September 15th. They were template documents Richard had drafted with outside counsel, standardized language positioning Richard Chen as successor principal architect for clients previously served by Marcus Morrison. The agreements referenced Marcus's retirement, a fiction since Marcus had never retired, he had died, and framed Richard as the natural continuity choice for ongoing institutional relationships. Richard had sent these agreements to 8 clients in the 3 weeks following Marcus's funeral. I photographed all 8. I noted the dates, the language, the client signatures. I made copies and filed them in chronological order in a 3-ring binder I kept locked in my car. On September 22, 2022, I stood outside the 47th floor conference room and listened to Richard pitch himself to Mansfield. Tower representatives, James Whitmore was in the room, 2 members of his facilities team. Richard sat at the head of the table in his usual position. Through the glass wall I could see his gestures, the open palms, the reassuring smile, the monogrammed cufflinks catching, the overhead light. His voice carried through the door. He said he had been the partner who really ran operations during Marcus's final years. He said Marcus had been brilliant, but increasingly unable to handle day-to-day client management. He said the transition to Richard's leadership would be seamless because he had already been serving as de facto principal architect on most major projects. James Whitmore nodded politely. He did not contradict Richard's narrative. He did not mention that the last signature on file for Mansfield Tower was mine. Not Richard's, not Marcus's. He simply listened while Richard rewrote the firm's history into a version where Marcus had been decorative and Richard had been essential. I stood outside the glass wall and did not interrupt. I went back to my interior office and added 3 pages of notes to the forensic binder. I documented the meeting date, the attendees, Richard's specific claims about operational control. I cross-referenced those claims against the contracts I had signed as attorney-in-fact. The discrepancy was measurable. Richard was claiming authority over relationships I legally controlled. On October 4th, 2022, Richard instructed the office manager to reroute all of Marcus's client calls to his extension. I was in the break room when I overheard the conversation. Richard said it was important that clients reach a live senior partner rather than voicemail on Marcus's old line. He said it created confusion when institutional contacts tried to reach Morrison Chen architecture and encountered a disconnected number or an outdated directory listing. The office manager updated the phone system that afternoon. Every client who had previously called Marcus's direct line now reached Richard's desk. I did not object. I documented the date and the instruction in my binder. I noted that Richard was now intercepting calls from 11 clients whose contracts carried my signature as binding. Authority. The phone rerouting was strategic erasure. It removed Marcus from the operational flow while positioning Richard as the singular point of contact. Clients calling to discuss projects would now hear Richard's voice first, last, always. Over time, their memory of who had managed the relationship would shift to match who answered the phone. On November 8, 2022, Richard presented at the Mid-Atlantic Architecture Conference in Philadelphia. I did not attend. I watched the video recording later. The session was titled Institutional Practice Management, Strategies for Long-Term Client Relationships. Richard stood at the podium in a tailored suit. He presented case studies from Morrison Chen Architecture's portfolio. The waterfront library Marcus had designed. The university edition I had signed the change order for while Marcus was hospitalized. The harbor development RFP I had submitted with my signature as attorney-in-fact. Richard described each project as his work. He used first-person pronouns. When I designed the waterfront library's reading room, the strategy I employed for harbor development's RFP, my approach to institutional client retention. Marcus's name appeared once in the fine print acknowledgments slide at the end. With gratitude to my late partner Marcus Morrison for his contributions to the firm's foundation. Contributions to the foundation. As if Marcus had built the scaffolding and Richard had erected the building, I saved the video file. I added it to the binder with timestamp notes marking every false claim Richard made about project authorship. On November 30th, 2022, Richard met with a prospective client for a new civic center project. I was not invited to the meeting. I learned about it from the calendar invite that appeared in my consultant email. New client intake, Civic Center Authority, Morrison Chen Architecture. I arrived at the office early the next morning and reviewed the meeting notes Richard had filed. He had described Morrison Chen Architecture's 20-year history. He had listed the firm's major institutional clients. He had explained the partnership structure. In Richard's version, Marcus had retired in 2018 after a successful career. Richard had assumed full leadership at that point and had successfully transitioned all client relationships to his oversight. The firm's recent work, everything from 2019 forward, was described as Richard's portfolio, built under Richard's direction, executed under Richard's vision. Marcus's final 3 years were erased, the period when I had held power of attorney, when I had signed contracts as attorney-in-fact, when Marcus and I had collaborated on proposals while his hands shook too badly to hold a pen. All of it vanished into Richard's false timeline, where Marcus retired before the Parkinsons became visible, and Richard inherited a practice rather than stealing one. I photographed the meeting notes. I added them to the binder. I did not correct the client. I let Richard's lie establish itself in their institutional memory. I played compliant for 16 months. I accepted the consultant title. I worked from the interior office 3 days per week. I stopped challenging Richard's narrative in team settings. When he described himself as successor principal architect, I nodded. When he claimed projects as his portfolio work, I stayed silent. When clients called him instead of the line that used to reach Marcus, I did not object. I performed the role of grieving daughter being gently managed out of her late father's practice. What I was actually doing was documenting fraud. I found Richard's forged signature on December 12, 2023. It was 11 p.m. The office was empty. I was in the file room with the wire-rimmed reading glasses David Sung had left on the conference table and a portable scanner I had bought specifically for this audit. I pulled the Mansfield Tower contract file, the renewal Richard had referenced in the buyout meeting. The signature dated October 14, 2022, 6 weeks after Marcus's death. I laid the document flat under the file room's overhead light. I examined the signature line. The name read Marcus Morrison. The handwriting was smooth, controlled, steady. No tremor, no Parkinson's shake. No evidence of the illness that had made Marcus's hand unusable for signing documents by March 2021. I pulled an exemplar signature from 2019, before the Parkinsons had progressed to the point where it affected fine motor control. The two signatures did not match. Different slant, different pressure, different letter formation. I pulled one of Marcus's final signatures from July 2022, 2 months before his death. That signature was barely legible. Shaking strokes, letters that wandered off the baseline. The tremor was visible in every curve. The October 14, 2022 signature was neither. It was not Marcus's healthy hand. It was not Marcus's Parkinson's-affected hand. It was someone else writing Marcus's name in smooth, confident strokes on a document dated 6 weeks after Marcus had died. Richard had forged my father's signature on a contract worth $427,000 in annual billing. I stood at the copy machine in the empty file room and photographed the forged signature next to the 2019 exemplar and the July 2022 tremor-affected version. 3 images side by side. The evidence was clear. This was not inheritance dispute. This was not family disagreement about Marcus's intentions. This was wire fraud. I made 4 copies of the forged document. I filed the original back in its folder. I added the copies to my forensic binder with tabbed sections labeled Mansfield Tower Forged Signature Evidence and Wire Fraud Documentation, Federal Statute 18 U.S.C. 1343. The binder grew to 47 pages over 6 months. Each page was tabbed by client name. Each section contained the contract I had signed as attorney-in-fact, the date of my valid signature, the filing receipt. From the client's institutional records and the false narrative Richard had constructed claiming the relationship as his own. Mansfield Tower, Harbor Development, University Library, Hartwell Museum, Grayson Properties. 8 other institutional clients whose contracts carried my signature and Richard's lies. For each client I documented the date I signed as attorney-in-fact, the specific contract language binding Morrison, Chen architecture to my authority, Richard's false claims about operational control, the financial value of the annual, billing relationship, the systematic pattern of erasure and theft. The binder was not emotional testimony. It was forensic evidence. Dollar amounts, dates, signature blocks, filing receipts, the kind of documentation that could survive a deposition or a federal fraud investigation. I kept the binder in the fireproof safe at my apartment next to the power of attorney documents. Every week I added new material, client meeting notes where Richard claimed authorship, conference presentations where he listed my signed projects as his portfolio, continuity agreements positioning him as successor architect when the contracts were legally bound to my signatures. On February 14, 2024, I sat in Marcus's home office, now mine, and spread all 47 pages across the desk. The 2-story colonial was quiet. The maple trees outside the window were bare. The drafting tables still held Marcus's final project files. I had not moved anything since his death. The office remained exactly as he had left it, down to the fountain pen I could no longer use because it reminded me of hands that shook too much to hold it steady. I arranged the evidence in chronological order. October 2020, Mansfield signature through December 2023, forged document discovery. 16 months of systematic theft laid out in dated sequence. Richard controlled the office narrative. He had David Sung and Patricia Okonkwo believing his continuity story. He had successfully erased Marcus and me from client relationships worth $4.7 million in annual billings. He thought he had inherited a practice. What he had actually done was commit federal wire fraud on institutional contracts I legally controlled. I closed the binder. I placed it in my work bag next to the silver compass necklace I wore every day. The evidence was complete. The documentation was airtight. The forensic case was ready. I did not know when I would deploy it. I only knew that when Richard finally made his move to formalize my erasure, I would be ready to show him exactly what he had stolen and exactly who actually owned it. The 47 pages sat in my bag like a loaded weapon. Precise, legal, undeniable. I waited. I stood in the conference room with my hands flat on the polished wood. The cold surface pressed against my palms. Richard Chen stared at the Mansfield Tower contract he had pulled from the transition binder 3 minutes earlier. His monogrammed cufflinks caught the morning light as he tilted the page. The signature line showed a name that was not his cursive. It was not the deteriorated scrawl Marcus Morrison's Parkinson's-affected hand produced in the final year. It was mine. The silence extended. I let it. Silence is structural. It bears weight. Richard's practiced sympathy smile had frozen into something harder. David Sung adjusted his wire-rimmed reading glasses and glanced at Patricia Okonkwo. She shifted in her tailored navy suit. The junior associate at the end of the table stopped typing. Richard cleared his throat. He leaned back in his chair with the kind of performative ease that told me he was already calculating his next move. There must be some administrative confusion here. The point is, I interrupted. My voice stayed level. The point is, you are presenting a buyout offer for client contracts you do not control. I reached into my bag. The 3-ring binder came out clean, 47 pages, each one tabbed with a client name written in black permanent marker. I set it on the table between us. Richard's eyes tracked the movement. Patricia Okonkwo leaned forward slightly. David Sung removed his reading glasses. Richard tried again. His tone shifted into that register people use when they are about to explain something to someone they have already decided does not understand. Elena, I understand you are emotional right now. Your father's death was a tremendous loss for all of us. We want to honor his legacy by making sure you are taken care of. I cut him off. I am not emotional. I am the durable power of attorney and backup signatory Marcus Morrison established in 2019. I have been signing contracts for this firm for 3 years. I opened the binder to the first tab. Page 1. Mansfield Tower 3-year renewal agreement. My signature as attorney in fact. Dated October 22, 2020. I slid the document across the table to David Sung. I read the date aloud. October 22, 2020. 14 months before the buyout meeting we are sitting in right now. Richard's face changed. The shift was small, but I had been watching him perform confidence for 6 years. I knew what it looked like when the performance collapsed. He realized I had been operationally in control of client contracts while he had been performing ownership in conference rooms and at architecture summits. Patricia Okonkwo's voice was careful. You have had signatory authority since 2019? I nodded. Durable power of attorney. Co-trustee on the operational LLC. Backup signature authorization on all major institutional contracts. My father filed the documents with his estate attorney the Monday after he gave me the authority. October 2019. I was 25 years old. Richard stood. He did not raise his voice, but his hands moved in that way. People's hands move when they are trying to take control of a room that is slipping away from them. That does not make you an architect, Elena. You cannot execute design contracts without professional licensure. The board requires... I stayed seated. I do not need to design buildings. I need to sign contracts. Power of attorney grants legal authority to execute agreements on behalf of the principal. My father taught me contract law before he taught me load-bearing structures. I turned to the second tab. Harbor Development Corporation request for proposal. Cover sheet signed by Elena Morrison, attorney in fact for Marcus Morrison. Page 7 listed Richard Chen as principal architect. I slid the document to Patricia Okonkwo. This is fraudulent inducement. You told the client you were the lead architect. My signature bound the contract. Your name insertion is material misrepresentation. Richard moved toward the door. His voice was tight. This is absurd. We will have the firm's attorney review the partnership succession documents and... Page 12. University Library Change Order. Signed March 17, 2021, while my father was hospitalized at Presbyterian Hospital. $140,000 budget increase. My signature, your project management. Page 19. Waterfront Plaza Phase 2 Environmental Impact Assessment. September 2021. My signature as attorney in fact authorizing the filing. Page 23. Medical Center Expansion Preliminary Design Contract. January 2022. My signature. Your client presentations. Each page, each client, each signature. I did not rush. I let the accumulation build like load on a structure. 11 clients total. I did the math aloud. $4.7 million in annual billings. You think you inherited them when my father died. You did not inherit them. You do not control them. I do. Richard's bluster collapsed into scramble. The partners will never allow a junior employee to claim operational control of... I pulled the final document from the back of the binder. Copy of the Mansfield Tower renewal Richard had shown me in our first meeting. The one dated October 14, 2022, 6 weeks after Marcus Morrison died. I placed my father's death certificate next to it. August 14, 2022. I read both dates aloud. August 14th, death certificate issued by the state medical examiner. October 14th. Contract signature purporting to be Marcus Morrison. Patricia Okonkwo's face went pale. David Sung put his reading glasses back on and leaned over the documents. He did not touch them. He just looked. I kept my voice level. You are not buying me out, Richard. You are explaining to these 3 witnesses why you forged a dead man's signature on a state institutional contract. Richard stepped back from the door. His hands were no longer performing control. They were just moving. There must be some administrative error. Marcus had documents pre-signed for continuity purposes. I was acting on his explicit instructions to maintain client relationships during the transition. I closed the binder. The sound was clean. I stood. I have emailed this documentation to all 14 institutional clients the firm manages. Subject line, continuity of service notification. The message includes copies of my valid power of attorney, my signatures on their active contracts, and a timeline of fiduciary authority transfer. They will receive it at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Patricia Okonkwo's breath was audible. David Sung removed his glasses again. Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I picked up my bag. You have until 9 a.m. to decide whether you are resigning from Morrison Chen Architecture or whether we are dissolving the partnership, and I am taking these contracts to a new practice. I have already filed articles of incorporation for Morrison Design Group. The operational LLC transfer is complete. The clients I signed for are not firm assets. They are contractual relationships I hold legal authority over. Richard found his voice. It came out thin. You cannot just... The partnership agreement has provisions for... I walked toward the door. The partnership agreement assumes both partners are alive. My father is dead. You forged his signature. I hold durable power of attorney that survives his death and transfers with his estate. I own the house you are standing in. I inherited his 51% equity stake in Morrison Chen Architecture, and I control the client contracts that generate the revenue you have been spending for the past 14 months. I stopped at the door. The silver drafting compass necklace was visible at my throat. I did not touch it. I just let them see it. David Sung spoke for the first time. His voice was very quiet. Does the firm's malpractice insurance carrier know about the forged signature? I looked at Richard. Not yet, but they will receive a courtesy notification tomorrow afternoon, after the clients have been informed. After you have made your decision. Patricia Okonkwo closed the transition binder Richard had prepared. Her hands were steady, but her voice was not. We need to convene an emergency partner meeting. I nodded. You do. I will be in my father's home office, the one I inherited, if you need to reach me. I walked out. The hallway was empty. My footsteps on the polished concrete floor were the only sound. I did not look back. I walked past the open studio floor where 12 junior architects sat at drafting tables, past the glass-walled meeting rooms where Richard had performed ownership in front of clients who thought he was continuing Marcus Morrison's legacy, past the reception desk where the firm's name was etched in brushed steel, Morrison Chen Architecture. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. The binder was under my arm. My bag was over my shoulder. The doors closed. I watched the floor numbers descend. 47, 46, 45. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia Okonkwo. We need to talk before you send that email. I did not respond. The email was already scheduled. It would send at 9 a.m. whether I was in the building or in my car or standing in my father's office looking at the drafting table where he taught me that power is not volume. It is knowing exactly where the load-bearing walls are. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. I walked through the marble atrium. Outside, the sky was overcast. The downtown skyline was gray. I stood on the sidewalk and felt the cold air on my face. My phone buzzed again. David Sung. Can we discuss this before it escalates? It was already escalated. It had been escalated since September 1st, 2022, when Richard demoted me from senior project coordinator to consultant and moved me to an interior office. Since October 4th, 2022, when he rerouted all my father's client calls to his own extension. Since November 8th, 2022, when he stood at the Mid-Atlantic Architecture Conference and claimed Marcus Morrison had retired. In 2018, erasing the final 3 years of my father's life. I got in my car. The binder sat on the passenger seat. 47 pages, 6 months of work. Every signature I had made as attorney in fact. Every contract Richard thought he controlled. Every client relationship he had performed ownership over while I held the actual legal authority. The drive to my father's house took 23 minutes. The 2-story colonial sat on a quiet street in the suburbs. I parked in the driveway. The key turned in the lock. The door opened. The house still smelled like him. Coffee and drafting pencils and the faint chemical smell of blueprint paper. I walked to his office. The drafting table was exactly where he left it. Client portfolios stacked on the shelf. The power of attorney documents were in the fireproof safe. I had filed copies with the estate attorney. I had filed copies with the operational LLC. I had kept copies in my own records. But the originals were here. I sat at his desk. My phone buzzed. Richard Chen. We can work this out. There is no need for litigation or public conflict. Let's discuss a revised partnership structure that recognizes your contributions. I set the phone down. I did not respond. There was no revised structure that would make me complicit in wire fraud. There was no partnership arrangement that would erase 14 months of systematic theft. My phone buzzed again. Patricia Okonkwo. The partners are meeting at 2 p.m. We would like you to attend. I responded, I will attend if Richard Chen submits a written resignation before the meeting begins. 3 minutes passed. No response. I opened my laptop. The scheduled email sat in my drafts folder. 14 institutional clients. 14 separate messages. Each one included my power of attorney documentation. Each one included the timeline of my signatures on their active contracts. Each one included a professional notice that I would be continuing their projects under Morrison Design Group and that any communications from Morrison Chen Architecture claiming contract authority should be verified against the attached legal documentation. I did not include the forged signature. I did not include accusations of fraud. I just included facts, dates, documents. Legal authority. My phone rang. David Sung. I answered. His voice was careful. Elena, we need to understand your intentions here. Are you trying to dissolve the firm, or are you trying to force Richard out? I am trying to honor my father's legacy. Richard forged his signature on a state contract. Richard systematically erased him from client relationships. Richard has been performing ownership over work I legally controlled. Those are facts. What you do with them is your decision. There was silence. Then, the partners cannot condone document forgery. But we also cannot allow the firm to collapse over internal conflict. Is there a resolution that protects the institutional relationships? The resolution is Richard resigns. I continue operating the contracts I signed. The firm transitions to Morrison Design Group, or we negotiate a licensing agreement for the Morrison Chen name. But Richard does not stay. More silence. I will discuss this with Patricia. The meeting is at 2. The call ended. I set the phone down. The drafting compass necklace felt cold against my skin. I touched it. My father had given it to me on a Saturday afternoon in October 2019, the same day he gave me power of attorney, the same day he told me Richard would try to erase me, the same day he taught me that the only advantage is the advantage they do not know you have. I stood. The office windows looked out over the backyard. The trees were bare. It was Thursday morning. By 9 a.m. tomorrow, 14 clients would know I held legal authority over their contracts. By 2 p.m. today, the partners would decide whether Richard Chen stayed or left. I did not know which way they would vote. I did not know whether they would side with institutional continuity or documentary evidence. But I knew the email was scheduled. I knew the evidence was compiled. I knew I had done exactly what my father taught me to do. I walked back to the drafting table. The compass he used for 40 years sat in its wooden case. I opened it. The brass was tarnished. The hinge was still smooth. I closed the case. My phone buzzed. Patricia Okonkwo. Richard has submitted his resignation effective immediately. We are canceling the 2 p.m. meeting. Can you come to the office tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss transition planning? I read the message 3 times. Then I responded, I will be there. I set the phone down. I stood in my father's office with the binder under my arm and the compass necklace at my throat. Outside, the sky was still gray. The house was still quiet. I did not celebrate. I did not call anyone. I just stood there and felt the cold air from the window and the weight of 6 months of work and the knowledge that in 48 hours Richard Chen's name would be off the door and mine would be on it. The floor beneath my feet was solid. The walls were load-bearing. The structure held. I walked back into my interior office on Thursday at 10:07 a.m. The space was 8 feet by 10 feet. No windows. A metal desk. One overhead fluorescent panel that hummed like tinnitus. This was where Richard had moved me on September 1st, 2022, 3 weeks after my father's funeral. I sat down, opened my laptop. The screen cast blue light across the silver drafting compass around my neck. I did not wait for Richard to call an emergency meeting. I did not wait for David Sung to request clarification. I did not wait for Patricia Okonkwo to express her sympathetic professional concern. I opened my email and composed 14 identical messages to 14 institutional clients. Subject line, Signatory Authority Notification, Morrison Chen Architecture. Body, Dear client name, I am writing to notify you of a change in signatory authority at Morrison Chen Architecture. As durable power of attorney and estate executor for Marcus Morrison, I have held primary signature authority on your contracts since 2019. Recent documentation irregularities require immediate clarification of chain of custody. Please contact me directly at the number below with any questions regarding contract validity. Sincerely, Elena Morrison, AIA, attorney-in-fact for the estate of Marcus Morrison. I attached my 2019 power of attorney document. I attached my father's death certificate dated August 14th, 2022. I attached copies of 11 contracts bearing my signature as attorney-in-fact, each one dated between October 2020 and November 2023. I hit send at 10:07 a.m. The whoosh sound felt like releasing a held breath. Through the glass walls of my interior office, I could see Richard moving across the studio floor toward the conference room. His monogrammed cufflinks caught the overhead lights. David Sung followed. Then Patricia Okonkwo. They were holding tablets and phones, an emergency partner meeting I was not invited to. I watched through 2 panes of frosted glass as Richard gestured, his mouth forming words I could not hear but could read in the rhythm of defensive corporate performance. Unstable grief response, legal overreach, we need to protect the firm. David Sung said something. Richard's shoulders went rigid. Patricia Okonkwo scrolled through her phone, face unreadable in the blue glow. I turned back to my laptop and opened a new spreadsheet. 11 client names, 11 contract values, 4.7 million in annual billings. I did not need to look at the numbers. I had memorized them 6 months ago when I started building the forensic binder. But I typed them anyway. Precision is a practice, not a gift. At 4:32 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number, I answered. James Whitmore's voice was institutional formality sharpened to a blade. Ms. Morrison, we need clarification on contract signatory for Mansfield Tower. Can you meet tomorrow morning, 8 a.m.? I confirmed. Neutral location, I said. Coffee shop on 5th and Main, he agreed. The call lasted 47 seconds. At 5:18 p.m., Harbor Development Corporation's general counsel left a voicemail. Urgent. Please call. I saved the message and did not return the call immediately. Let them wait. Let them wonder. Let the silence build like load on a beam. By 10 p.m., 9 of the 14 clients had requested immediate meetings. Not with Morrison Chen Architecture. Not with Richard Chen, senior partner. With me, Elena Morrison, attorney-in-fact. The woman Richard had demoted to consultant and moved to an interior office without windows. At 10:34 p.m., my phone buzzed. Richard's name on the screen. I let it ring. The voicemail notification appeared 30 seconds later. I played it on speaker while I packed my leather portfolio case with contract copies and power of attorney documents for tomorrow's meetings. Elena! Richard's voice through the phone speaker sounded like strained corporate diplomacy trying not to fracture into panic. I think there's been a misunderstanding. We can resolve this internally. No need to involve clients. Let's talk tomorrow morning before this escalates further. Please call me back tonight. We're all on the same team here. I deleted the message before it finished. We were never on the same team. Teams share information. Teams operate in good faith. Richard operated a scheme to erase my father's name from the letterhead and substitute his own. I was not interested in his version of resolution. Thursday night, I did not sleep. I sat at my father's drafting table in the 2-story colonial home office I had inherited. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling beams. I reviewed my notes for the Mansfield Tower meeting. James Whitmore would bring his leather portfolio case. He would ask who signed the renewal 14 months ago. I would show him my signature as attorney-in-fact. I would show him Richard's forged Marcus Morrison's signature dated October 14th, 2022, 6 weeks after my father died on August 14th, 2022. I would let him reach his own conclusion about fraudulent inducement and contract validity. At 8 a.m. Friday, I sat across from James Whitmore in a coffee shop booth. Vinyl seats, laminate table, the smell of burnt espresso and dish soap. He wore a charcoal suit and carried the same leather portfolio case I had seen in client meetings for 3 years. He did not order coffee. He opened the portfolio and removed contract copies. "Who actually signed our renewal 14 months ago?" he said. His voice was not accusatory. It was the voice of a client representative who needed documentation for his file before the lawyers got involved. "I did," I said. I slid 3 documents across the table. My signature on the Mansfield Tower renewal dated October 22nd, 2020. My durable power of attorney document dated October 2019. My father's death certificate dated August 14th, 2022. Then I slid the 4th document. The renewal Richard had shown me in the conference room Thursday morning. The one with Marcus Morrison's signature dated October 14th, 2022, 6 weeks after his death. James Whitmore's face did not change expression. He studied the documents in sequence, picked up the forged signature page, held it next to my father's death certificate, looked at me. "He told us your father retired and signed off before his death," Whitmore said. "My father died August 14th, 2022, I said. "This document is dated October 14th, 2022. Whitmore closed the portfolio. The leather made a soft sound like a door shutting. "We'll need to speak with our legal team about contract validity and potential misrepresentation." "I understand," I said. "My signatures are valid under durable power of attorney filed with the court in 2019. I'm happy to provide any documentation your legal team requires." He stood, shook my hand, left the coffee shop without finishing the sentence we both knew the ending to. By noon Friday, Patricia Okonkwo called my cell. Her voice had lost its sympathetic professional distance. "We need to talk," she said. "Emergency partner meeting at 2 p.m. You should be there." At 1:47 p.m., I walked into the 47th floor conference room. David Sung sat at the head of the table. Patricia Okonkwo to his left, Richard Chen to his right, monogrammed cufflinks catching the overhead lights like a distress signal. A junior partner whose name I had never learned sat at the far end taking notes on a laptop. David Sung removed his wire-rimmed reading glasses and cleaned them with a microfiber cloth. "We've received contact from 6 clients in the last 24 hours, he said. His voice was cautious corporate neutrality starting to show stress fractures. Harbor Development sent a cease and desist to Richard personally threatening to report to the state licensing board for fraudulent inducement. Mansfield Tower is demanding documentation of signatory chain of custody. Richard, explain the forged signature." Richard leaned forward. "It was a continuity measure," he said. "Clients needed reassurance during the transition. Marcus would have wanted—" Patricia Okonkwo cut him off. "Marcus had been dead for 6 weeks, she said. You forged a signature on a state contract. That's not continuity. That's fraud." Richard pivoted. His voice shifted register from defensive to attacking. "She had no right to contact clients directly," he said, gesturing toward me. "She's trying to sabotage the firm. This is a grief response. She needs professional help, not—" "I have every right," I said. My voice stayed level. "I'm the attorney in fact and a state executor. I was notifying them of signatory authority they had a legal right to know." David Sung put his glasses back on. "How many clients did you sign for while Marcus was alive?" 11 of the 14 major contracts, I said, from October 2020 through November 2023. Patricia Okonkwo looked at Richard. "And you didn't know?" "My father filed the power of attorney with his estate attorney in 2019, I said. "It wasn't secret. It wasn't disclosed to partners because it was personal estate planning between a father and daughter. But it was legally binding. Every signature I made was valid." The conference room went silent except for the hum of the HVAC system. David Sung removed his glasses again, folded them, set them on the polished wood table. "Richard," he said, "I think you need to consider your options." Richard tried to negotiate. "We can resolve this," he said. "Bring in outside counsel, restructure the partnership, establish new client protocols. This doesn't have to—" Patricia Okonkwo interrupted. 6 clients have contacted us in 24 hours, she said. When the rest receive Elena's documentation Monday morning, how many more will want to speak with her instead of you? Richard saw the trap close around him. His face went pale under the overhead fluorescent lights. If I leave, the firm collapses, he said. If you stay, I said, I take the 11 contracts worth 4.7 spams in annual billings to a new practice, and the firm collapses. Faster. Partner vote, David Sung said. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Richard stood, grabbed his tablet, walked out of the conference room without closing the door behind him. I watched him cross the studio floor past the 12 junior architects working at their drafting tables. None of them looked up. They kept their heads down over blueprints and CAD screens like people who had learned to make themselves invisible. During corporate executions, Saturday morning at 9 a.m., we reconvened in the conference room. David Sung called the vote. Motion. Richard Chen resigns as senior partner effective immediately, retains no client portfolio, receives buyout, package for capital contribution only. David voted yes. Patricia voted yes. The junior partner voted yes. Richard voted no, 3-1. The motion carried. Richard tried to negotiate departure terms. He wanted a percentage of future billings from clients he had worked with. He wanted a 6-month office transition period. He wanted a non-compete waiver so he could start his own practice. He wanted $500,000 in severance. I sat across the table from him. I did not speak. I let him list his demands. I let him perform the role of senior partner one last time. Then I reached into my leather portfolio case and removed a single sheet of paper. I slid it across the polished wood table. I'll offer you exactly what you offered me Thursday morning, I said. $280,000 for your office furniture. Richard's face went white. Patricia Okonkwo looked down at her hands, but I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. David Sung cleared his throat and pretended to review documents on his tablet. Richard took the $280,000. He signed the resignation agreement, effective immediately. He packed his monogrammed cufflinks into a cardboard box, along with framed certificates and a desk lamp. 36 hours from my email to his exit from the building. I stood at the 47th floor conference room window and watched Richard's car leave the parking garage. Black sedan, tinted windows. It turned left onto 5th Street and disappeared into downtown traffic. My hand touched the silver drafting compass around my neck. David Sung appeared beside me. Your father would be proud, he said. My father taught me to read the structure, I said. Richard only saw the facade. The 47-page forensic binder sat on the conference table behind us. 11 client contracts, 11 signatures, 4.7 in annual billings. The documentation Richard did not know existed until 48 hours ago when it dismantled everything he thought he had. Inherited. I had spent 6 months compiling that binder in my father's home office. 6 months of quiet precision while Richard performed ownership in client meetings and rewrote history at architecture. Conferences. My phone buzzed. Text message from James Whitmore. Mansfield Tower has completed legal review. Your signatures are valid. We will continue contract relationship with Morrison Design Group when transfer is finalized. Please send updated invoicing information. I forwarded the message to David Sung. He read it, nodded. 11 contracts, I said. All transferring to Morrison Design Group. You'll retain the other 3 and whatever new business you can generate without Richard's forged continuity agreements. He extended his hand. I shook it. We were not friends. We were not family. We were professionals executing a clean transfer of assets after one party committed fraud and the other party held the key.
Receipts.
I walked out of Morrison Chen Architecture at 10:23 a.m. Saturday morning. I took the elevator down 47 floors. I walked through the lobby with its marble floors and chrome fixtures. I stepped out onto 5th Street. The November air was cold and sharp. I turned left, walked 3 blocks to the 22nd floor office space I had leased 2 weeks ago for Morrison Design Group. The office was small, bright, one window overlooking the street. I hung my father's framed power of attorney document on the wall next to my drafting table. The document that gave me signature authority in 2019 when I was 25 years old, and Richard thought I was just a project coordinator he could erase. If you are watching this, and you have ever been the invisible labor that held the structure together while someone else took credit, I want you to know something. You are not a variable to be zeroed out. You are not furniture to be bought out. You are the signature authority nobody saw coming. And when they try to forge over you, when they try to rewrite your work as their inheritance, you have every right to produce the receipts and watch their facade collapse in 48 hours. I sat at my drafting table in Morrison Design Group's new office for exactly 22 minutes. Then my phone rang. Unknown number, I answered. Jonathan Morrison, a woman's voice, calm, professional. Yes, this is Amanda Kerrigan from Architectural Digest. We received a very interesting submission yesterday about Morrison Chen architecture and some documentation regarding signature fraud on multiple contracts. Would you be available to speak on the record about your father's work and the transfer of his client relationships? I paused, looked at the power of attorney document on my wall. The document Richard had pretended did not exist for 4 years. Who submitted the documentation? I asked. David Sung, she said, along with a statement that Morrison Chen Architecture is committed to transparency and wishes to clarify the historical record regarding James Morrison's body of work versus Richard Chen's recent claims at industry conferences. David Sung had just thrown Richard under a moving train, in print, on the record, to the one publication every architect in North America read. I'm available, I said. The interview ran 3 weeks later, 6 pages. Photographs of my father's original sketches next to Richard's forged continuity agreements. Quotes from James Whitmore at Mansfield Development. Quotes from David Sung carefully distancing Morrison Chen architecture from Richard's fraud while praising my father's integrity and my continuation of his client relationships. Richard called me 4 times that day. I did not answer. He left one voicemail. You destroyed me, he said. His voice was shaking. Do you understand what you've done? I'm finished. Every firm in the city knows. Every client. You could have just taken the buyout and walked away quietly. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the end. Morrison Design Group signed 2 new contracts in December, one in January. I hired my first associate in February, a young architect named Sarah Chen. No relation to Richard. I asked her directly in the interview. She laughed, said she'd legally dropped the Chen surname after reading the Architectural Digest piece because she did not want the association. I understood that impulse completely. My mother called once in March. Brief, awkward. Richard is living with his sister in Portland, she said. He had to leave the city. The shame was too much. I did not ask which sister. I did not ask if he'd found work. I said nothing. Are you happy now? She asked. Was this worth it? I looked at my drafting table, at the Mansfield Tower elevation pinned to my board, at Sarah working quietly across the office on the Whitmore Residence's landscape integration. Yes, I said. She hung up. I have not spoken to my mother since. I have not spoken to Richard since the conference room. I do not plan to. The well is cemented. The subscription has ended. They do not get to rewrite this story with reconciliation epilogues or lessons learned. Follow The Great Revenge on all platforms. Join our community of people who held the structure together while someone else performed ownership. You are not supporting characters in someone else's inheritance narrative. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one. 6 months after Richard left the building, I stood at my drafting table on the 22nd floor. Morrison Design Group occupied a smaller space than the 47th floor offices 3 blocks north. The windows faced east. Morning light crossed the room in long, clean lines. 2 junior architects worked at adjacent tables, their laptops open, blueprint software rendering structural details for the Mansfield Tower expansion. I was teaching them contract review, not just CAD software, the same way Marcus taught me. The approved